weather in Grafton is fairly consistent, featuring beautiful warm summer days and sometimes bitterly cold, long, harsh winters. Spring and fall in particular have brought on some of the most frightening weather events. In September of 1938, a hurricane that cost hundreds of lives and millions of dollars in damage throughout New England hit Grafton. The post office and the Old Village School building on Main Street near the bridge were torn from their foundations. Downtown Grafton was a disaster area, and the Main Street Bridge had been washed away by torrential floodwaters. Access in and out of the town was impossible for several days. Using typical Yankee ingenuity, some hardy citizens found some very innovative ways to get around. Even today, the twisted remains of the Main Street Bridge can be found along the banks of the Saxton River. It is an eerie testament to the power of the flood from the hurricane of 1938. During a two-day period in June of 1996, Grafton was pounded by multiple thunderstorms and torrential heavy rain. The results were devastating. Houses along Townsend Road and adjacent farmlands were inundated. The roads were impassable. Stream beds gushed over their banks, bringing with them a torrent of rocks and mud. Several residents, hip-deep in fast-moving silty water, fled for their lives. Uprooted trees, silt, and stones clogged culverts, and the overflowing brook swamped pastures and ponds and wiped out hiking trails. Piles of mud, rocks, and dirt covered lawns and gardens, invaded basements, tore down fences and stone walls, and littered fields with debris. 7 years later, in August of 2003, rain and lightning struck again, dumping 5 inches of rain onto the already saturated landscape, sending the Saxton River roaring over its banks. Anything by the banks that wasn't bolted down was swept away by the angry river. Fully grown trees, ripped out by their roots, were sent bobbing down the raging rapids. Through all Mother Nature's chaos, the resilient citizens of this small New England town pump out their basements and clean up the streets. Life goes on in Grafton. The beauty and preservation of modern Grafton can be traced back to the founding of the Wyndham Foundation in 1963. The Foundation's initial goals were preservation, restoration, and revitalization in Grafton. In the early years of the Wyndham Foundation, many houses were purchased from local residents at market prices. Following the restoration, which in some cases included the installation of electricity and running water, the former owners were given life tenancy. The Foundation also operates the Old Tavern in Grafton Center. Open to guests in 1801, the Old Tavern was enlarged in 1820 to accommodate an increase in travelers. Throughout the tavern's history, it has provided accommodations for some notable guests, including Ulysses S. Grant campaigning for his first term as president. Rudyard Kipling made the 5-hour journey to Grafton by horse and carriage from his home in Dummerston. He enjoyed lunch at the tavern and later sat outside with local artists and chatted. He then made the return trip to Dummerston to continue work on his masterpiece, The Jungle Book. The Old Tavern was purchased and restored by the Wyndham Foundation in 1965. Skiers in winter and tourists in summer and fall foliage seasons once more find the inn a quiet, refreshing retreat. The Wyndham Foundation also owns and operates the Grafton Village Cheese Company, producers of award-winning Vermont cheddar cheese. When visitors come to Grafton, they are sure to admire the beauty that seems to radiate from every corner of this small New England village. But what makes the town truly unique is that the same Yankee spirit that pioneered Tomlinson years ago is alive and well today in the hard-working residents of Grafton. Generations of native Vermonters have passed on a way of living that has stood the test of time. It is the celebration of a simple life and a sense of community, a way of life lost in many parts of America due to the exhaustive pace of a 24/7 world. On Memorial Day weekend 2004, Grafton will celebrate a number of traditions. The continuing tradition of the Grafton Cornet Band that has provided entertainment for Grafton and surrounding towns since 1867. The tradition of Grafton's war veterans, who have bravely served our country in wars dating back to the birth of this nation. Survivors of World War II and Vietnam, who participate in Memorial Day celebrations today, have survived harrowing battles and brushes with death, while performing incredible acts of bravery. Last but not least, the traditions of a small town in Vermont and its people, who have persevered for 250 years. Grafton remains today a place that fosters strength, not only in the physical constitution of its inhabitants, but in their character and Yankee resourcefulness. What is it that has sustained Grafton through times of settlement, growth, decline, and rebirth? Perhaps it is the character of its first families and their legacies to their descendants, or the contributions of succeeding generations of newcomers. Perhaps it is the presence of a foundation with a generous mandate for restoration and preservation, or a community that treasures the past as well as the present. All these elements and more play an important part in keeping the unique small Vermont town of Grafton alive and changing today and into the 21st century. Happy birthday, Grafton, and here's to another 250 years. The narration of this video was adapted from the Grafton Historical Society's publication, $5 and a Jug of Rum, The History of Grafton, Vermont. The book is available at the Grafton History Museum.